Jeremy Pruitt, rumored to be returning to college football. Now, other than just the really, really immoral things that can happen, um, that are just morally and legally wrong, such as Penn State or something like that. I mean, as far as real college athletics, Jeremy Pruitt ranks right up there. He didn't have as much financial support as, let's say, Southern California to give Reggie Bush a house, but if he could have, he would have. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Money flowing left and right. He actually, at one point, is just so absolutely off the wall that he reached out to us at one point to defend Jeremy Banks. Um, whether or not it's a good hire, we could debate that. I think he's a little crazy, but I also think that Nick Saban does a good job of rehabilitating these guys, and he was a good defensive coordinator for a long time. So the word is that he could go to Alabama and be their defensive coordinator. They need an upgrade at both coordinator positions from last year, in my opinion. What are your thoughts on the NCAA allowing Jeremy Pruitt to come back into the fold of college football?
Well, this is where it's up in the air, and this is why I'm not so sure Nick Saban is going to hire him, because we forget this. The NCAA has still not finished their investigation into Tennessee.
That's right.
They haven't come out with the punishment yet. We don't know. They might give Jeremy Pruitt a show cause. And imagine if Nick Saban hires Jeremy Pruitt, and then Jeremy Pruitt's given a show cause, and Nick Saban has to go back to the drawing board to find another defensive coordinator. If he isn't, maybe that's why Nick Saban's waiting. Because Dave, you may know, I know Tennessee pushed back the investigation, the final results of it for a month, and so they might figure out where they stand at the end of this month. So maybe that's what Nick Saban is waiting for.
I was told they pushed it back just in case they made the college football playoff, and just in case there was a postseason ban. So that would be horrendously embarrassing. So here are my thoughts on Saban. He is so tied in and embedded with the SEC that he's not going to make a hire of Jeremy Pruitt unless he knows there's no show cause or that it is easily defeatable. So the way a show cause works, for those that don't know, is a show cause is you have to essentially show cause why he is a good hire, a positive hire after previous issues. So just because you have a show cause doesn't mean you can't get hired. You then, though, it drags out the hiring process. And you're right, you could hire him today. The NCAA could come out with a show cause, and then you have to make a case for him. So then suddenly you could be into March or April still looking for your defensive coordinator, and they don't want that to happen. And I will say this: I think there is not necessarily Alabama bias, but elite bias, that once you get to that level, you're going to get a little phone call from somebody at the SEC office and say, I think you're good to go, Nick. Or you stand a better chance, in my opinion, of winning by show cause if you have to go through that process on the back end. But again, it's not a perfect scenario to have Jeremy Pruitt just kind of flopping around in the wind for the next 2 months. I've got a lot of respect for what Nick Saban was able to figure out with all these analysts. I mean, they have like 25 analysts. And listen, Tennessee's starting to do the same thing. And the only difference between an analyst and a coach, Caleb, is they're not allowed on the field. Well, I can tell you, as soon as the media is asked to leave, that they all run out on the field at every school. Okay? I mean, that's a fact. I've been at a practice where coaches, analysts, whatever you want to call them, were running onto the field, and they're like, you didn't see me. I was like, okay, fine, I didn't see. But so I've got a lot of respect for what Nick Saban has done. Not that he just resurrected coaches, but he got the best out of Butch Jones. I think Butch had some insight into the offense that they ran for a number of years. I think Lane Kiffin speaks for himself. I think all these guys have done well, and he's gotten the best out of them. So not from a rehabilitation standpoint, but the way he's built that. But Jeremy Pruitt, man, seems like a hell of a reach to me. I mean, if half what I've heard is true, there's no way in creation I would make that hire, even if I could get away with it.
So I'm not going to disqualify myself, but I will just qualify what I say with I don't know the half of what you heard because I know you've heard a lot more than I have about what was going on with Jeremy Pruitt about Tennessee. If based on the surface of what I know, if that's all the information that I have, and that's all that was there, honestly, I don't mind Nick Saban hiring him back. And I'm going to say why. One, this is about paying players, and yeah, what he did was stupid, cash in McDonald's bags and things like that. It was so reckless. But at the same time, I mean, we got to be honest, there's NIL is effectively a recruiting method now anyway. It's effectively legalized, and I know you're not supposed to use it for recruiting, but we know it's done. I don't think Jeremy Pruitt should be absolved from punishment. I don't think the show, but he's been out of college football for 2 years now. Tennessee was able to fire him for cause, so they don't have to pay his buyout, and they shouldn't have to. I think because of that, I think it's fair to let Jeremy Pruitt back in if he wants to coach defense at Alabama. I'm going to actually be. Here's the thing. I don't know if you've ever noticed, but I will say this. This is proof that he's a coordinator, not a head coach, to be fair. Players seem to love Jeremy Pruitt. His players love him.
They do.
And I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, and I want to be real clear that this is just a football only issue that I have with Jeremy Pruitt and why I wouldn't hire him. And you're right, the NIL, maybe all that he was doing at Tennessee becomes legal. That's very true. But this is not a personal issue that I have with Jeremy Pruitt. And by personal, I think Butch Jones abused some of his players. I think that he was a sociopath. I think that's a whole different level. So, I mean, if somebody would have called me from Arkansas State, I would have told them the truth. Not that they would have cared, but that's a whole different level. So this is just to me on taking those guys out of the equation, the people that are abusive to their players and just abusive to media and abusive across the board. I'm taking that out of play. But just in terms of football stuff only, I mean, I think Jeremy Pruitt's right up there with a 9 on the football scale going back to the old SMU days. I think if he would have had a Corvette to give to Eric Dickerson, he would have given Eric Dickerson a Corvette. So that is what concerns me. And but I guess that I'm being cautious. However, do we really think the NCAA is going to crack down on Alabama in Nick Saban's final years in Tuscaloosa? There's no way they're going to let that go out like that. Like you get 40, scholarship reductions and all that. He's not going to go out like Pete Carroll did at Southern California. He's not.
Who we all know bolted. Pete Carroll bolted into the same way Urban Meyer did. Urban Meyer with Florida ran. He knew the program was heading for disaster, I think, and he was ready to leave that mess on someone else's doorstep. And
I also think he knew that Nick Saban was going to dominate the league. I do believe that. I covered that SEC championship game, both of them, so helped me with the years. But it was Florida won the first one, and then Alabama won the second. And he didn't like any part of that game, nor the post game, nor anything like that. And you could just tell that he had. I was talking to some other coaches around the league. It was like that he had just. I don't want this to sound flippant because he did possibly have a heart issue, which I question. Esophageal spasms is essentially a panic attack, but I talked to coaches around the league, and he looked across the sideline and he said, "That dude's better." And I think that was the end. And you're right. Florida too had a eventual convicted murderer on their team. There were all kinds of issues there. So no, I mean, but with Jeremy Pruitt to hire him back, I don't. I guess if you're Nick Saban, you're able to work your way around it, but I'd have trouble sleeping at night knowing he was on my staff because of the vast multitude of NCAA infractions that he just committed freely. So
I
What?
think he cracked under pressure at Tennessee. I think running a whole program as opposed to focusing on just one side of the ball had him crack under pressure, and he wouldn't do that at Alabama. And I say that because you know this. Jeremy Pruitt had never been even an associate head coach at even the high school level before he took over at Tennessee. All he ever was a coordinator. And I think just running I don't think he would go behind Nick Saban's back to do cheating, coaching under Nick Saban. Largely because one, you don't have to cheat if you're at Alabama at this point, and so I think that's a big deal. I want to actually pause and give Jeremy Pruitt a bit of credit on this. We love the job Josh Heupel's done. Jeremy Pruitt scouted so many of these players that nobody wanted. You know, he found Cedric Tillman, and I think honestly this is a hot take, but Jeremy Pruitt had an eye for some talent, honestly, that a lot of coaches don't have.
No, I remember thinking that he was a little bit ahead of the curve because now everybody uses edge, which drives me crazy. It's not that hard to go DE/linebacker, but everybody uses edge as a new position in football. Well, it wasn't new. Lawrence Taylor was doing it. Sometimes he'd put his hand down on the ground, sometimes he wouldn't. But I did think that the one time I spoke to Jeremy Pruitt kind of off to the side, that he was a little bit ahead of his curve because he didn't care if you put your hand down or put your hand up, and it was really all about the body lean that you're able to get into players. So, yeah, I mean, I think if you want to talk about personnel development, evaluating talent, I think the X's and O's probably is still Saban's, don't you?
Yeah.
The game
Yeah.
plan. But if you want to talk about developing players, I think he's fantastic at that. So that's why to me he should just go to the NFL and that should be the end of it. And if I were a head coach or an athletic director, I wouldn't risk the potential embarrassment of hiring him. And listen, the embarrassment's on the front end. He doesn't have to screw up anymore. Just by saying you're hiring him, aren't you kind of throwing up the white flag a little bit of I've run through every other coach because I'm hard on coaches. My name is Nick Saban and you're next.
I mean, I don't think you have to if you're Nick Saban. Nick Saban can honestly be like, look at my record and look at my background. I'm hiring him because he's the best coach and because I can and because I'm Nick Saban. And I'm like, if another school hired Jimmy Pruitt, I think we might be having it might look a little desperate. I don't think Nick Saban's desperate. I think there's a lot of coaches that would want that job to be his defensive coordinator. So if Jeremy Pruitt gets the job, he got it because Nick Saban preferred him to everybody else, not because Nick Saban was desperate. Okay. This is not a Sal Sunseri hire.
No. I'm going to argue this though through people I talk to. I just wonder if Nick Saban has run through the elite coaches on his staff because he's had such great turnover. Can he just call anybody anymore? Okay, let's go back. Brent Venables at Clemson before he gets a head coaching job. Could he have called Brent Venables and said, I've got $5 million a year for you. It's a lateral move. I understand that, but we want you here at Alabama. I think 10 years ago, he could call and make that sort of hire. I don't know that he can just call up a staff and make that hire now because he's incredibly difficult to work with.
I don't think he could make the hire with Brent Venables because I think that in college football coaching circles, everybody knows that the coordinators are the brains behind Dabo Swinney's success. Whereas, so would you rather be a coordinator winning a national championship at Clemson or winning at Alabama? You'd rather do it at Clemson because you know Alabama, Nick Saban's really in coaching circles, Nick Saban's getting all the credit because he's the defensive guru, he's the mastermind. Whereas Dabo is more of a CEO and hands off. But do I think that a lot of other places he could pull that off? Yeah. I mean, I think he could still get a lot of high profile coaches in there. More so on the offensive side, I'll concede that because I think it's kind of well known that Nick Saban really lets offensive coordinators run the show. And you've seen more, Lane Kiffin, Brian Dabble, Jimbo Fisher to go back, Jim McElwain. Jim McElwain got a head coaching job, which is so. I mean, it's So I think it's more
with the San Jose Sharks.
Oh. Oh my God! I will never forget the 2009 Tennessee Alabama game that Tennessee almost won, the blocked field goal. if you remember, the only reason Tennessee was in that game was because Jim McElwain was so incompetent calling plays for Alabama on the other side of the ball. I mean, he was an embarrassment of a coach. I'm sorry, but
I think the Shark deserves a little bit of blame too, because the Shark may have broken up his marriage. I don't know. They seem very close. Surely that wasn't him. That was the most surreal.
oh my
SEC media.
god,
Just how he had to defend himself. It was bizarre. I still thought it looked a lot like him, naked man with a shark. Whatever.